Welcome to the B2B Category Creators Podcast, hosted by Gil Alouche, founder and CEO of Metadata.io. This podcast is all about sharing the real and sometimes uncomfortable secrets of category creation in the B2B software space. On this week's episode, we have Andrew Waitman, CEO of Assent, fastest growing supply chain transparency company in the world, and Todd Olson, CEO and founder of Pendo, a product experience platform that helps software product teams deliver products users love.
Happy Friday, everyone. My name is Gil Alouche, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Metadata, and we're at the weekly podcast of Category Creator Podcast. We have two great guests with us, Todd and Andrew, and we'll start with quick introductions. Todd, maybe you can start us off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the company.
Yeah, absolutely, Gil. Thanks for having me. So my name is Todd Olson. I am the CEO and co-founder of Pendo. Prior to starting Pendo, I've kind of had most of my career in enterprise software. I started coding at the age of 14. I started my first company at the age of 20. Had a couple exits around there. Most recently, prior to Pendo, I was the VP of product at Rally Software. That's the role where I really got inspired to create Pendo. I was the product leader for an enterprise SaaS company. I felt that my ability to get good data on how my customers were using my product was hard and typically held back by having to invest in developers to actually hand instrument the product. That problem, combined with the ability of our users to adopt our software, was just a core challenge for me. So when I want to start something new, it's kind of where I started, and that's what Pendo does today. We have a platform for product teams to help them measure everything about the user's journey within a digital interface, and we provide in-app messaging to help guide and help so we drive value out of that.
Cool, thank you. It's a cool background. Andrew, maybe you can lead us next.
Gil, thanks for having me on your podcast. Super appreciate it. I'm Andrew Waitman, the Chief Executive Officer of Assent Compliance. My founder would call me a founder. In fact, he keeps telling me to add founder to my title. I joined Assent through my boxing coach, who was also one of the founders. And I had just grown a managed services business from kind of under 5 million to over 50 million. And the founder went a little squirrely on me. So I left and joined Assent. I'm a former venture capitalist. So I had one of the best venture track records in Canada. And in 2008, 2008 was an interesting year. So I left the venture business and became an operator through a surprise set of circumstances. And then, 6-7 years ago, I went into Assent, which was about 15 people. Today, we're well over 700 people. And what we do is we create kind of a transparent work record for the largest manufacturers in the world to know what's going on in their supply chain, to live by ethical and environmental practices. So if you've heard of the term ESG, environmental, social, and governance, we're a benchmark ESG company, so that in non-financial reporting, you have the records. As a Boeing, as a Tesla, as a Oracle, you can basically say, I know what's going on in my supply chain. It's the reason you're having me here today is it's an emerging market, and that's, I think, our topic today. But it's an important ESG is probably one of the hottest issues now, almost as hot as AI was a couple of years ago. And you need an ability to kind of have a work record and a due diligence methodology, just like financial systems for non-financial measures. You need a method where you can ensure that the kind of rules and regulations are being followed by your supply chain. So thank you very much for having me on, Gil.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Both of you said very interesting things, I think, about your background. Todd, you mentioned starting to code at 14 and then starting your business at 20. That's awesome. 6 years, a gap between those. That's really great. You monetize it quickly. And did I hear you right, Andrew, that you said your boxing coach was the one who connected you? So you're a VC, you're in the dark side for entrepreneurs anyway, for the operators, and then you moved into becoming an operator.
Yeah,
Can you
like
tell us a little bit about that?
well, I was, I don't know if any of you have tried boxing, but I started at the young age of 46. And let's just say the first 10 sessions, I got beat up so badly that I was really questioning my sanity of why I would do that. But I stuck with it. And boxing is a great way to stay fit. It's a great way. It's a very complex art, science, the beautiful sport. And one of my founders, there's 3 founders at Assent. One of them was my boxing coach. So that's how I got to know him. And when I left Pythian, he asked me to come help him out. And I said, look, I don't want to jump into another role yet, but if you provide me an office, I'll give you advice. And that literally was the contract. And so I volunteered for a couple of months, and then they were like, we need you as our CEO. And so that was kind of around 15 people. And, that was six and a half years ago. So we've had one hell of a ride.
Super cool. Super interesting. And I completely agree about martial arts and boxing. Can you just tell me this? Do you guys still spar?
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
So he just
such a healthy way to remove all the intensity you may have sometimes.
It's funny, between the CEO and a founder, it's an amazing way to make sure that you're keeping the dialogue. And Todd, you probably know this. Like, it's really important, that if you bring in an outside CEO, like, that relationship is so crucial. And if we had anything, it's funny because it's boxing, but if we had any issues along the route, right, we were dealing with it Wednesday night.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Super healthy. Awesome. Well, thank you both for the introduction. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. Todd, maybe you can start us off a little bit about category creation, just to kind of start the conversation. You said that you started, if I hear it correctly, you started Pendo on a personal need, right? You were working, you were missing that was a pain for you, and you started a company. That is how many companies get started, I think, or many of the right ones. When you started Pendo, did you have, given that you started other companies before, did you have that idea of category creation in mind when you started the company, or how did that come about?
I had the idea that I wanted to sell the product. I had a vision of, hey, there's platforms for all these different roles, but as a product leader, if I'm in an executive meeting, I'm usually showing like screenshots of what I just shipped. I don't have a lot of metrics. I don't have a system. I felt like woefully undervalued as a member of the executive team. So from day one, we said, we're going to sell the product. And of course, invariably in this startup journey, I'm meeting seed investors. They're like, we think you should sell it to marketing. There's a lot more budget over there. And I was like, yeah, I get it. Largest variable budget in a company. But why not sell to a group that no one else is selling to? And then, you get the first question back was, well, they don't have any budget. And I was like, well, it's kind of hard to have budget for something when solutions don't exist to buy them, right? Like, which comes first, right? Yes. And I was like, look, if we don't build something to targeting something, no one's going to be able to ask for budget to actually do it. So that was the thesis day one, is that let's sell to an audience that is being sold to. There's an opportunity to create a system of record and create something. And yeah, we got a lot of pushback.
Super interesting. What you just said, I think, is one of those moments I'm going to repeat later. Which comes first, the budget item or something to buy with it. Interesting. Andrew, what about you when you joined the company as a CEO, and it was really small, and I think go ahead.
Yeah, and it was, it's an interesting issue in terms of an emerging market. So, as a venture capitalist, which I was, you would always ask, what is the alternative? And in the time I was venture investing, it was often Microsoft is going to do this, okay? In an enterprise, whatever it was, Microsoft is going to do this, right? But so the interesting question is, are you replacing something? Why was there not an existing need? So what's changed in the environment? And to Todd's point, like, is there a budget? And he makes a really good point. And we had this in our world because the people who were dealing with the engagement with the supply chain were kind of doing it as part of their second or third job. Okay. And they were using spreadsheets, they were using SharePoint, they didn't have a central solution, they didn't have any automation, and it was very tedious. Okay. Trying to engage with your supply chain, use email, et cetera. So there's a certain tipping point in any market where you go from using kind of what you would call, a duct tape solution, often with spreadsheets or some other tools. And then there's a tipping point that says this is madness doing this. And I would say in our world, particularly now that ESG is lit up, it's moving from tactical to strategic. And I think, Todd will probably speak to that as well. When markets emerge, they often start tactically, somebody just looking for something to help them with a specific. But then over time, and I saw the security industry 20 years ago go through this, it was just, Bill in a closet taking care of antivirus. To today, it's are you getting hacked? Are you getting ransomware? So partly there's a progression of how big the issue is, how's it being solved, and is there a use of a SaaS tool? And to Todd's point, we sell to different departments, and some of them, part of the friction of selling is them finding where they're going to get the budget from to pay for this. But then they start to see the value, and then they eventually bring it up to higher levels where they start to anticipate for next year how they're going to get that into the budget.
And when you and maybe Todd, maybe that's more for you. Like when you're tackling this conundrum, like, okay, and you're getting a pushback, why aren't you selling to marketing? No one sells to product, they don't have budget. I think you also mentioned you didn't have as much of a place on the table like you would like, and that was partially what you were trying to fix. I hear that a lot. I think Gainsight, Nick Mehta was mentioning customer success and making them a first-class citizen. Sounds like you're trying to do the same thing on the product side. Are there particular principles or a framework that you keep checking to see that your initial thesis about this is a new category or this is a new animal is happening? Like from month one, when you started this and said this is going to be for product managers to do things that are impossible to do today, they're doing it in that tipping point. They're doing it with Excel and it doesn't make any sense, and you keep evaluating it. Or how do you confirm that thesis about this is completely new? Here I have a few KPIs that shows that I'm on the right path.
Look, I think the crux of your question, if I may paraphrase or rephrase it almost, is like, how do you know that you have product market fit in terms of this? And then how do you know that this ultimately is going to be a big enough category where you have a company of consequence? That's really what it comes down to. You could be the master of a small category. And the question is, for many of us that raise venture capital, like that's not enough to generate the sort of outcomes that's expected, right? So how do you know that it's big? How do you know that the TAM's large? I think there's maybe no magic number per se, but there's a variety of things we look at. We do look at the investment we made in our brand and content. So I think when you're doing category creation, nearly every company that does this well has to invest in content. And so we have a large content strategy. We actually manage a separate brand called productcraft.com that we created a few years ago. It continues to have very strong organic growth. It's arguably one of the largest product communities in the world, and that fuels a lot of the brand recognition as well as inbound interest. What's nice is we look at independent data, like number of product managers in the world and chief product officers of the world. It's actually increased in the last few years. We're even starting to see chief product officers emerge in large enterprises, banks. And sometimes it goes between chief product officer and chief digital officer. I find them as actually pretty similar roles, but there's a significant increase in the last 4 to 5 years, which is probably one of the most telling early indicators that this is a must-have when you have a role reporting to a CEO that obviously is more must-have. So I think it's those things that we look at to help us measure our success. I mean, the other thing though is increasing venture capital into product-related startups. I was doing a call, I think it was like Sequoia, like a few months ago, and they said, I want to say they said that they see a product startup like every week now. And trust me, it's not the case. In 2013, we started Pendo, like people thought we're crazy. So I think that's good. I mean, I think other companies pivoting, and like we had several competitors that were more marketing focused when we founded the company. 3 years later, all of a sudden they have product analytics. It's like, oh, wait, no, like I go back on the internet time machine and show your marketing analytics last week, and all of a sudden your product analytics. Like, when did this happen? What happened is like the success we've had and the opportunity started to become clearer to other folks who are probably a little hesitant to do it. So there's a lot of indicators that I look to help us realize we're on the right path. So.
Thank you for rephrasing the product market fit and big enough of an outcome. I remember that this was insightful. I remember when I had the CMO of Launch Darkly, he was mentioning, it was Keith, and he was mentioning, you know, if there is the way for him at least to measure if this is big enough, not just being the master of a super small category, to your words, but a big enough outcome for the VC model is if the TAM, if the ARR of the TAM is just like, I don't know, north of 100 million at least. Is that how you see that too? Is that how you answer the second part of the question?
Well, yeah, it ultimately comes down to TAM. It's what would, you know, and you can, I like, I mean, if you just do a, you know, so the problem with a new category, there is no top-down TAM. It's not like Gartner and IDC says, oh, you know, companies spent, like, you have no idea. So you have to do a bottoms-up TAM. So you get number of companies or number of, you know, in some cases, individuals with roles, and you kind of try to extrapolate how much, you know, what's the average deal size that you can sell to these companies and or these individuals. And that's how you can extract a TAM. Then you got to look at what percentage of that would make a viable business. And yeah, we're fortunate now. We have, you know, we've managed to carve out a very large TAM, you know, but part of that is also growing our platform. You know, I think we've taken also a platform approach to make sure that, so there's two aspects. There's how many companies / you know, what's the population of individuals or companies to whom we can sell, and then how much value we can get. The value we can get is usually commensurate with how broad your platform is, or how much, you know, how much value it delivers back. So I think you got to invest in both. And so that's kind of how I attribute it. And we actually focus on both. So like, you know, we focus on broadening to whom we can sell, like adding features for large enterprises, going international, things like that. And then we look at, you know, expanding what we can sell to them through acquisition, innovation, things like that.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Gil, if I could on this topic, I call it stringing pearls together. So every startup has to start on some pearl, and that pearl might be small. So whatever value you're adding, the niche may be nascent and small, but you create an ember. And from that ember, you get validity. So in our case, it was a regulation called conflict minerals. Okay. And there was a Dodd-Frank rule, 1502, companies had to file. So there was law, there was a time, there was a requirement. A lot of VCs stayed away from us because that looked like a niche offering. And there's usually moms and pops in every market. And those moms and pops for choice or for competence don't grow. So what you have to do is, if you're going, is you have to see where the next pearl is. First, we take Manhattan, then we take Berlin. Okay. And that's a song, which I often have in the back of my head. But the point is, to Todd's point about how you expand TAM, there's two dimensions. There's what is your target? Are we starting with SMB and going to mid-market and then enterprise? Are we starting in enterprise and moving down market, and why? Okay, and can we? And what is the value that we're creating? And part of Assent's thesis was you are getting, every manufacturing company is getting inundated with human rights, modern slavery, ethical and environmental regulations that you have to have a work record around of some sort of due diligence. And so our thesis was, if we could string a set of pearls together, and for me, in the 6 years I've been at Assent, each year there was a hotspot, and we connected these pearls into a valuable platform. To Todd's point, if you listen to Jason Lemkin and you listen to the kind of explosion of SaaS companies, almost every founder CEO recognizes is become a platform. How do you become a platform? How do you connect more value to your original thesis. And if your thesis is big enough, supply chain transparency, you can navigate. And then the magic is that you navigate and own a piece of land and then start expanding that land. Okay, so I think the emergent category, Todd made a really important point. Forrester and Gardner Group do not have reports on what you're doing. The iPad, when it first came out, had no report on, iPads. Okay, so when you're developing emerging markets, you have to, even if the first pearl is small, you have to then see how you're going to link it to the next pearl and the next pearl. I started in a business with over 50 mom and pops when I came in as a CEO, and I was a bit unnerved as a prior venture capitalist going, why is no company able to get to critical mass here, like an Ariba for supply chain? And the reason is it's a very complex market, and you have to navigate the pearls very, very carefully, which we've done. And I'm sure, Todd, in your kind of, there's things that you now see that you can do, which you wouldn't have started doing, but you can add to the value of your platform.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can also tell that Andrew's been on more podcasts and is better than me because he's dropping these metaphors like pearls. So, but I love it. Yeah, I think looking at all the, I have a less cool term. I call them adjacencies. But I think looking at what markets are adjacent, I'll throw out a Jeffrey Mooreism since it makes me look a little smarter. I love this bowling pin.
Yeah.
We use bowling pins all the time at Pendo. A lot of the internal strategy things. It's like, okay, we could do one of two things. We can sell what we sell, the solution we sell, to different adjacent audiences, or we can sell something slightly different to the same audience. You can't do both. You can't sell something brand new to a whole new audience never sold to. So how do we look at traversing the market just using that very basic premise? And that's how we build a category.
Awesome. Cheers. This was great section there. I'm, by the way, not drinking coffee. It's just I don't have any proper glass. I'm going to get dinged for it later from the marketing team. Not looking great drinking alcohol from a mug.
You should get your participants to talk about what they're drinking. Like, what's the level of alcohol?
You're 100% right.
Or is it light wine?
Well, if you would go back to all the episodes, you would find that I just missed to do it today. So thank you for getting the attention. What are you drinking, Andrew?
It's Kim Crawford. I don't know if you know your New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs, but Kim's one of the biggest exports out of New Zealand is Sauvignon Blanc, and it's a beautiful white wine.
Very cool. And what are you drinking, Todd?
I am. I'm at the beach today, so I of course had to bring a Cuba Libre. Nice. So with Bacardi 8, which is like my kind of go-to. My go-to rum down here.
Awesome. Very cool. I'm no fancy like you. I'm just drinking a maker's here, but we have to do another cheers. Thank you for getting us to discuss this. All right, let's pivot a little bit from category. Although I feel like there is a lot more pearls of wisdom to unravel here, but for now, maybe let's pivot a little bit. Todd, do you have a recurring entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur experience? That's your and looks like also an engineer, technical engineer point of view. So I'm just gonna, for the sake of this, for this next few sentences, I'm just gonna box you in the technical founder, repeatable founder box. And Andrew, I'm gonna keep you as the dark side because you were a VC and a successful one. So that says a lot in a good way. Maybe when you both think about category creation, because both of you are creating categories in very different domains, and you came up with the like the concept differently, right? Like you experienced it personally. You were invited by your boxing coach. When you started day one, given that you have very different perspectives and experience, how did you think about this question? Okay, is this a new category, and is this how am I going to invest in this? I'm going to test it a little bit. I'm going to just make a big investment from day one. How did you think about that from the moment you went on this path, and I'm going to build a big company around this. This is how I think about category creation and the investments I'm going to make starting now. Andrew, maybe you can start us off.
Yeah, sure. So first, it's an interesting question you ask, because how much is adaptive and how much is prescriptive and anticipative? And let me give you the first point, because in Canada, so I'm based in Ottawa, Canada. One of the challenges that the country has is building $100 million businesses. Okay, so we start a lot of companies up in Canada, in Toronto, Waterloo, Montreal, Ottawa, Vancouver, et cetera. But we have a challenge getting them to thresholds. So to your question about an emerging space, first of all, I would say ambition is important. Okay. So guys, do you want to just flip this at 10 or 15 million, which, literally hundreds of thousands of companies could flip at 10 or 20 million. And I wasn't going to take a leadership role if that was the intention of the original founders. And it wasn't. And so I said, okay, great. Okay. Now let's figure out, okay, where we have to go in order, and how big could this be? Okay. And so one of the things that, to your question of imagination is, could I imagine, and I was articulate on this from almost day one. I said, guys, can you imagine if we could sell $1 million to 100 customers? And that was my kind of first premise, although I was selling something at the time, which was 50,000 ARR. Okay. And I said, can you imagine what it would take in engineering and why, okay, this company, this large manufacturer may pay us $1 million a year? And can you imagine that in the next kind of 3 to 5 years? Okay. So I think you have to have some semblance, but then you have to come back, and how do you eat an elephant? You eat an elephant one pearl at a time, okay, one bite at a time. And so the trick then, the magic, is figuring out what's the right navigation. Where's the urgency? Where's the pain point? How can you string, to Todd's point, adjacencies together? And in terms of anticipation, or, for me, it was, I'm an ambitious guy. I see a lot of moms and pops in this space, but I believe there's a potential network effect here. And let me just quickly describe what I saw, and we're still not fully envisioned. But obviously, there's lots of manufacturers and there's very large supply chains. But the supply chains and the manufacturers don't come together in a network. If you could create that network, okay, so I called it Salesforce and LinkedIn in one company for manufacturers and their supply chain, then magic could happen. And we're on that path. So it's a very ambitious idea. Lots of people can think about it, but executing to that scale is a myriad of 1,000 decisions. And so I would say from day one, and this was really your question, was I thinking about being big? Absolutely. Like, I am not going to do a business unless I can see 100 million, ARR. And then, now I'm looking at 500 million ARR. So, but then it's, how do you step back from that and figure out, how do I get to that network? How do I get, 1,000 manufacturing customers over $1 billion to bring their supplier network in? And how do I leverage that to the benefit of both sides of the network? So you do have to have what I would call cognitive models that and then you have to execute. So it's fine, being very, kind of clever and smart. Lots of people can think good ideas. Then you have to get from A to B to C to D, and you have to survive. And part of that survival is articulating where you are in the story and why investors should join that story, because that enables you to invest in the engineering and the go-to-market. And, is there friction along the way? There's friction along the way. Like, you hit air pockets and you have to navigate, but that product market fit and that faith in where you're going has to be your North Star.
Very interesting. It sounds like you validated, Keith's from Launch Darkly's point about the $100 million ARR as the kind of critical mass that
First marker.
That you pass. Todd, what about you? When you entered, what was your framework of thinking about, and then the investment that you make? Like, you make a decision that's great. You're thinking it's going to be huge. Do you put the money? I think you mentioned brand being a big deal. I don't know if you can share a percentage that you spend on brand. Most companies, B2B SaaS companies, spend very little, but maybe that's a big mistake. Can you share maybe a little bit about that, around that context?
Yeah. Well, I guess if I go back to where we started, I mean, I think brand did come a lot later. We didn't do that day one. Was we need to make sure we create a product that's disruptively better than other solutions in the market. That that alternatives, even if there aren't other products, manual solutions, are just a lot worse than what we're providing. The other big thing that the thesis we had day one, was that we were solving a problem that required a broad product. And that was probably the number one thesis we made in the company. Still today, I think it's one of our biggest bets, because we built a product analytics solution. And and you asked me, it's the context of a builder and a founder. So like I did write code for the first almost year of the company's history. So we built and launched a product analytics solution that was a collect everything solution. It was probably disruptively good just at that alone when we first shipped it in early 2014. And then we started building a messaging solution like the next month, and then shipped that, right? Most founders, most startups would have just done the one thing, and like the focus. It's conventional wisdom. We're always told to focus. And I kept rebuffing this, saying, we are focused. We're focused on a problem. The problem is driving adoption of software, and that problem just requires a broader solution. So I feel like I'm focused. I feel like I had to defend myself, by the way, like incredible numbers of times. But just the solution was broad, and that was the thesis. That was, and yet we still had to prove that these two things go hand in hand and deliver value. So in a way that, again, was like disruptively better than anything else in the market. And so I think differentiation is one of the words that I obsess over the most. And above all of the things, like whatever we're building, like it needs to be highly differentiated. It needs to be kind of apparent to the end customer and end buyer why this thing is unique and special. And if we're not doing that, there's something not working in the product. So that's what I obsessed over. I'll also say, I'll add that, like Andrew, I mean, I was thinking about 100 million in ARR basically day one. That there was kind of that's where we're headed, at least. And that's the focus. I wish I had said something as smart as 100 customers paying us $1 million. I didn't probably think it was that granular, but I like that model. I didn't do it at the time. I probably did do it a few years after that. But yeah, I think that 100 million threshold was important at the time. Of course, I'm thinking back to 2013, 2014. Like, to become what you would think you'd need to be a unicorn, it would be about 100 ARR. It's just now multiples are like 2x what they were then. So we hit it actually much sooner. But that was the funny part. I thought it would have to get to there to get it. It didn't. But I mean, reality is we're gonna get there anyway. So that wasn't less of a question at this point. But yeah, and then throughout the entire process, it's got to be a mindset that you're playing the long game. Yeah, that's part of raising capital. Lots of capital. You're playing a long game, and this is what entrepreneurs have to realize. Every time you raise something, you have to clear that bar somehow. And so everyone like all happy, they're patting themselves in the back. It's the more money, more problems concept. I mean, the reality is, if you have more cash, like you got another hill to climb. And you know what? I want to climb hills. I'm not here to settle on the hill I'm on. I'm here to get to the next one. Like it gets more fun, it gets more challenging, it gets more interesting. So like I think one of my seed investors early on, when we raised some crazy amount of money, like we had back-to-back Series B and C's within 6 months of each other, and it I think doubled the value of the business. I think people thought we were a little bit crazy at the time. But one of our seed investors says, this is just what Todd wants to do. Like it was in my head the whole time, like zero question. You just got to keep pushing and keep growing. So I think you have to look ahead. I mean, and you're playing the long-term game. So brand's a long-term game. Building a broad platform is a long-term game. These are long-term games. When you talk to some companies that are trying to get an exit in like 6 or 7 years. I have no time horizon. I don't like, people ask me all the time, what's your exit? There's no exit. Exit means I'm leaving. And I love what I do. Why would I want to leave? Where am I going? Like, no, I mean, I'm young enough where I kind of have to work, and why would I want to work anywhere else but here? So that's kind of how I've always approached it. Just keep building. And that's ultimately how you create a category winner, I think, is you don't give up. you outlast other people. So many companies go for a quick win or a quick exit or some reason, but like I wake up every day like it's the first. Doesn't Amazon have some cool thing like day one mentality?
Everybody, yeah, day
Again,
one.
He's also better at probably podcast than I am. So like, yeah, he came up with this cool term. Yeah, like, but I know I feel that way. It's like bringing the energy every single day, bringing the intensity, the focus. I mean, I think that's how you create category creation. That's how you win. So,
you said so many things, very interesting ones. I want to go into a different question, but I have one last one because I can't help by asking. You both mentioned the $100 million ARR story from day one. Hey, you had this vision, and you both also validate and say, but on the path there are 1,000 decisions, there are all kinds of pearls, all kinds of tactics, all kinds of things on the way, milestones that you have to reach between this and being a $100 to $200 million ARR. And then you talked about branding. So when you have those three things in a Venn diagram, you try to figure out, okay, what I'm doing branding, let's say it's a long-term, right? It's a long-term strategy, you said. So I start today with a small investment on branding. And there is the vision, it's 3 years from now, let's say, and there is current reality, survivalist reality today. How do you bridge the gap when you do branding from the promise to the reality? Briefly, both to investors and to customers, maybe more to customers. Did you understand the question?
Yeah,
Why?
yeah.
Go ahead, Todd.
And yeah, I was going to say, look, the investment in branding, you're going to get some positive signals along the way. Whether it's inbound traffic from that, whether it's honestly, this is a classic. When you're investing in something that's very long term, if you're trying to get people on your side and excited about it, you have to find ways to tell stories. And one of my classic phrases I say in the company is like, if I can see something once, I can probably do it a lot more times. It's like the first time you hit $1 million customer, it's like, okay, we just hit $1 million customer. What's the next one? Like if you can prove to yourself you can do something once, you can prove yourself you can do it lots of times. So same with the brand. If I can prove that this investment in brand yields some positive outcome, I know it can yield a hell of a lot more positive outcomes. So it's like, and what I'm always searching for is that story, that emotional grip that like tell the board or we tell the employees, like, look, we did this, we invested in this like very cool event or this campaign or this brand building exercise, and this is what it yielded. Yeah, it's step one. Yeah, we got a long way to go, but like if we can do this once, we can do this thousands of times. I mean, obviously, right? So I think that's where I always go to in the early days of these types of investment decisions, because some people, it's easy for a CFO to push back on you or a board member to put back on you. Really, like you're hiring like a head of community, like that's you get all sorts of questions around things like this, but you have to connect the dots for them and tell those stories and everything. And then once you get people on your side, you wait, a year or two, and you'll start seeing the results. I mean, our investment brand are paying off big time now, but it started 3 or 4 years ago, and now it's like I forget the stats and the amount of inbound as a percentage of our overall demand gen, but it's staggeringly high because we did it a while ago. It also means that it creates an opportunity for us to just drive more growth with outbound and other things. So it's just these are great investments, but the early days was all about storytelling in my mind.
You mentioned the short-term return for some of these investments and how it doesn't have to be there. Just one example. I remember when we did our first customer event, one of the investors in Metadata came by and asked me like, Gil, what's the ROI for this event? Like how much sales? And I had a hard time like answering this question. I told him actually we did actually close a few upsells during this one-day event, but I was thinking about it in similar lines to how like building a community and telling the story. So it's interesting. You had that conviction early. Andrew, I know you wanted to chime in.
Well, Gil, I'll give you both an answer if you get asked silly questions by investors. Okay. So there's an idiom in advertising, which Gil, I'm sure historically we've all watched Mad Men, but 50% of my ad dollars are a waste of money. I just don't know which half. Okay. So whenever somebody asks you, what's your ROI? You say, well, half of it, I'm not sure. The other half, okay, I can tell you is X. It's interesting if you think about COVID and the fact that your team cannot or has not been traveling. Okay. And, Todd, you probably run into this, Gil, you probably have as well. And so you probably saved a fair bit of money. Okay. And travel is one of those things where, half the money you spend on travel is not a good ROI. The other half is excellent. You just don't know which half. Okay. Because you closed a lot of business and nobody was traveling. Okay. But anyway, I digress. I want to go back to a point that Todd made and Gil, you were asking about, because you're on this brand. Brands, I think, tie to aspiration always. If you look at my LinkedIn, my very first time I put CEO of Assent, I thought this line is going to be important of what I say. And so it better be. And I put supply chain transparency. Okay. So it's an aspirational part of the brand. So a brand is something that, like there's an aspirational part and then there's a reality part that, as Todd speaks about it, it comes in narratives that you speak to customers, to investors, to employees every single day. And in some sense, you're refining it. I think one of those places where you're constantly refining is in your content. And one of the things that we did as an emerging market, and you need this in spades, we have assembled 2022 of the world's top compliance regulation experts for manufacturers. So we have hired, the top guy out of Intel. We've hired the top guy out of this organization, the top lady out of this on human trafficking, et cetera, et cetera. And the interesting thing is part of your brand, part of it is an evolving. So we just yesterday and today held, and Todd, I don't know if you do this, but as an emerging company, if you are going to be the major player, you need to create a conference around, like Jason Lemkin did for, building SaaS companies. You need the defining conference. And part of the defining conference is you have and you invite and you bring together the subject matter experts of this emerging space. Okay. That space could be product lifecycle management. That space could be something else. ERP 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So I think the content is an important part of the narrative that develops over time of what is this space, how does Assent play in this, and why is supply chain transparency so important in a ESG world? Like one of the interesting things, just to not get too into the weeds, but our world is being rocked positively. We call it a tailwind, okay, by the US government. And I didn't know this was going to occur 5 or 6 years ago, basically saying our supply chains need to be thought about more strategically, more resilient wise, because we don't want to be relying on China. Okay. Now, did I know that supply chain transparency was going to suddenly take US government, okay, carrots and sticks to enforce that you're not using substances that China controls, or you're not doing practices in China that America wants nothing to do with? So it's really interesting how brands are, aspirational and large, but they're also adaptive to, context. And transparent supply chain transparency is becoming like the big thing. It's about ESG, it's about, government. So I think they're a constant evolution. And I do think the putting on a major annual event, publishing that content and having your subject matter experts out there speaking all contribute to that thought leadership of defining a brand.
Andrew, I think you have a great talent for answering the question completely and also consistently doing a sales pitch for Assent. I think
you guys aren't manufacturers.
That's a great.
Hopefully, some of your listeners are.
Oh, absolutely. You gotta answer this, Andrew. Like, do you get the compliance folks together with a little bit of alcohol like this and see what content they create? So that could be fun.
Awesome, great segue. Please have another drink, Andrew. Just so you know, in different episodes, I would make you drink the whole thing, but the answer was there, so good. So. Not enforcing it. Hey, I know we only have 10 minutes left. I am having the best of time. This time I cannot be over, so I want to touch a few other items that are outside of category creation, although I think this was extremely valuable discussion. Maybe let me ask you a few brief ones. First one is #fail moment. So maybe Andrew, you can start us off. Tell us briefly about a fail moment in the process of trying to create that category, making that big story. I think you mentioned without kind of volunteer that there were lots of friction, or there is some friction that you mentioned. Maybe you can translate some of those one example into a hashtag fail moment.
Absolutely. Came to mind immediately is I didn't anticipate the complexity of the platform of where my aspirations and for the category creation, what a Boeing would require, what a Tesla would require. And therefore I underinvested in the engineering team and it nearly killed us. Okay. So some companies are founder led with very strong technical. Our company was founder led with very strong sales and marketing credentials, and I underestimated, and it really did hurt us for the first couple of years, the breadth and scope of the technical knowledge that was going to be required to build that enterprise scale platform. It didn't put us out of business, but our early large customers, it nearly killed us.
Very cool. If you had to give yourself one line advice of, when that happened, going back, what would it be?
Always invest more money in the quality of the engineering team. Always go for much higher experience, like people who have built like enterprise scale systems.
Nice. Todd, you had an expression, so do you want to make a comment on that?
No, it's always good to invest in products. So big believer, +1.
Nice, like that. What's yours, Todd?
This is hard for me.
It doesn't have to come from Pendo, but just a hashtag fail moment that you lost sleep at night because you messed up.
I feel like I have to use Pendo one, so I'll use Pendo one. I think the earliest thing is we did was we thought if we just kind of threw it out there, and free products, selling startups, that somehow it would all just work, and it didn't. Like, one thing I learned in category creation is that if you're doing something brand new, very few people may be looking for that new thing. So it finally dawned on me that we should actually have a sales oriented motion. So I started selling about a year into the company's history, and which is pretty ironic given that we sell software to help people do product-led growth. We actually were selling for most of our life. So that's the irony and kind of funny part of the whole thing. We actually now have a free product, but it's only now because the category like can sustain it. But for me, and I'd never sold a thing in my entire life. So
I doubt that as a serial founder, I haven't sold anything, but I'll let it go.
I mean, like, carried a bag sold, like I don't know. It was a different experience for me. But anyway, that I think going from kind of shutting down a free product to like going more sales oriented was probably one of the biggest fails. And actually focusing on the enterprise. We're like, okay, these startups, like, we want to make them successful, but like, we're just more enterprise software people. So like, the one line advice for me is recognize who you are. Like, I'm an enterprise software person, and try to get a motion working before you start trying to dabble in motions that are less familiar to you. So.
Super fair. Thank you both for sharing that. If you, and I think you also answered the if you went to go back, how you do that. If you had to share one thing about yourself that other people don't know, that the public doesn't know, that TechCrunch, SaaStr, and LinkedIn don't know about you, Todd, what would that be?
Yeah, I feel like our life's a book these days, isn't it? So, I think one thing I don't talk too much about. Earlier in my career, I had two definitely arguably failed startups before this, so I don't talk a lot about the failures as much, but definitely a lot of learnings, a lot of lessons in there. So I think that's something that isn't talked about too much.
Do you think the bigger the failure, the better you are later on? Like, it just made you like a kick-ass, badass entrepreneur, like, afterwards?
Yeah, I think there's two things. That my first failure is that I was a 20-year-old, started a company. We had an exit. literally our investors thought we were too young to negotiate the deal and hired a banker and just completely collapsed the deal. And absolutely horrific experience. I didn't like lay off a whole bunch of people I'd hired from scratch. And I was really young, like 24, 25. I'd never really done that before. So like that sucked. But I'll tell you two things I pulled away from that very fast. One is an unyielding confidence that if you can do it once, you can do it again. It's why I continue getting back on the horse, so to speak. It's like, if you get that close to some level of success, you immediately think that you can do it again. Now, the second thing is, given the level of success I have now, and then the reason that I had failures before, I appreciate this so much more. Like, if I, because if I had just crazy success then, maybe I wouldn't appreciate this. But knowing how hard it is to get to this point makes me want to cherish it, take advantage of it, crush it every single day, because like you don't find what we have at Pendo like very often. It's hard to build it, it's hard to sustain it. I think so. It's one, it's confidence I can do it again, but then this realization how hard it is. Those are the two things I pulled away from that.
Beautiful balance between conviction and humbleness. That's cool. Andrew.
Yeah, I was thinking about your question. We could go into so many dimensions of, I was adopted, had a absolutely shitty kind of childhood, but somehow won the genetic lottery and was able to go to university, pay for it on my own, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the thing that might surprise people is, as an introvert, okay, and this is going to sound paradoxical, I'm an extreme introvert, okay? But what do I most love? Okay, so the contrast between being a venture capitalist, where you're really sitting on a board and making one decision, okay, once in a while. The thing I love about running Assent and running a company in general is the role of getting people to work together for a common purpose is like nothing, okay? Because entropy and chaos are the natural states of human existence, okay? And we can go into that philosophically if you want to. But the CEO at some level is a person to get other people to work together for a common purpose. And to me, there is nothing more rewarding when you see that. And I call it magic. I really do, because I had it at Pythian, and then the founder went crazy on me. That's chaos. And I have it at Assent. And it is a beautiful thing. And it's such, you should almost just whisper about it. You shouldn't talk about it on podcast, because it's so fragile. It's so fragile. And if you can get, whether it's 700 or 1,000 people or 2,000 people to work together for a common purpose, and in our case, this purpose is wonderful. It's to make sure we have better environmental and ethical practices throughout manufacturing. There is nothing I can't imagine, like, and don't tell my investor or board this, but I would do this for no money. Okay. It's a beautiful thing to be able to see that orchestration. And I think that's far more rewarding in some sense. So, I obviously don't talk about that philosophy a lot, but I truly think that's what's special about, being in the position I'm in.
Beautiful. Thanks both for sharing. You shared intimate things and very valuable ones. So very much appreciate the candor. This is great. I took 3 pages of notes. Hopefully you didn't mind during this podcast. I learned a lot. Really appreciate you sharing all of these about yourself and about your journey and about creating categories. I learned a lot, and I think our listeners as well. We'll finish with a cheer.
Gil, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Andrew.
Likewise.
Thank you, Todd. I really enjoyed your
Nice
company.
to meet you, Todd.
Yeah, likewise, Andrew. Great being here. Thanks, everyone.
Gentlemen, have a wonderful weekend. I really appreciate your contribution here.
Thanks again for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion and will tune in again. Find all of the B2B Category Creators episodes at Metadata.io. And if you have any feedback, topics, or would like to be a guest on the show, please reach out.